Welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we're going to treat ancient coins not just as pieces of money, but as massive, ancient data storage units. I am so excited to guide you through this because we are essentially going to become time-traveling detectives.
So think about this for a second. How do we reconstruct the history of an entire empire when the history books are simply missing? Well, when the texts disappear, it's usually the smallest metal objects left in the dirt that reveal forgotten rulers, lost trade routes, and huge economic booms. We're going to see exactly how a tiny little piece of stamped metal can decode a whole civilization.
Here's our roadmap for the explainer today. First, defining numismatics. 2. Ancient coin minting techniques. 3. Early punch-marked coins. 4. Post-Mauryan and tribal coins. 5. Foreign and regional kings. And finally, number 6, the Roman coin trade. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. Defining numismatics and how coins act as history.
Right off the bat, we need to establish that numismatics isn't just a fancy word for coin collecting. It's actually the hardcore science of reading metallic documents. You see, in ancient India, long before widespread paper records survived, coins were basically the official broadcasts of the state. They tell us exactly what kind of technology they had, the economy they managed, and the sheer political power they wielded.
Moving on to Section 2, Ancient Coin Minting Techniques and Production.
Just imagine being an ancient blacksmith for a minute. According to old texts like Kautilya's Arthashastra, you'd melt metal in a crucible, purify it, and beat it flat on an anvil. But what's really wild is this final step. They cut the sheets with clippers, and if the piece was too heavy, they just snipped the corners right off. Weight was absolutely everything to these ancient states, so they really didn't care about making a perfectly circular shape.
Now, what about mass production? For base metals like copper and lead, they use this brilliant casting process. They'd press a design into clay, bake it into terracotta, and join two halves together. Then they'd pour molten metal through a tiny little vent at the top. Once it all cooled down, they'd just crack the mold open to extract the cast coin. It was an incredibly efficient way to mint thousands of pieces, whether they were inscribed with text or left completely blank.
Let's actually visualize this ancient minting process. Picture the intense, scorching heat of a crucible furnace, purifying the raw metals. Whether they were working with copper, silver, specific alloys, or eventually the brilliant gold of later empires, they'd often use alkalis to purify this molten mix before it ever became currency.
Next up, if they were going the casting route, that molten metal got poured straight into stacked terracotta double molds, just like you see here. Notice how carefully they had to seal them with clay to prevent leaks. It required a massive amount of expertise to keep both sides of the mold perfectly synced up.
But hey, if they weren't casting, they were punching. They'd use a thin iron or bronze die, just like this one. The engravers had to meticulously carve the design in negative so that when it struck the metal, the positive image would pop out perfectly.
And you really have to appreciate the sheer physical effort this took. Try to picture an artisan striking a heavy hammer down onto the die to stamp the coin blank. Imagine doing that thousands of times a single day. It was a highly skilled, intensely physically demanding industry.
This whole thing totally flips our modern expectation of perfectly round, uniform coins right on its head. Ancient Indians cared so deeply about the intrinsic value of the silver that meant a clipped, kinda awkward-looking square coin was perfectly good money as long as the weight was dead on. Alternatively, they'd use the droplet method, where they poured an exact, pre-measured amount of molten metal to get round or elliptical shapes.
All right, Section 3. Early punch-marked coins, India's very earliest coinage.
We are looking at a completely indigenous, native evolution here. Long before any Greek influence, India went from simple metallic pieces used for barter in the Vedic period right into the first local punch-marked coins of the Janapadas, the early regional states in the 6th century BCE. By the time the massive Mauryan Empire rolled around, these silver coins were heavily standardized, carrying these complex, multiple-punched symbols like suns, trees, and animals all across the subcontinent.
Section 4. Post-Mauryan and tribal coins.
Of course, empires eventually fall, and when the Mauryan Empire fractured around the 2nd century BCE, local groups essentially took the power of the mint into their own hands. Look at how the data on the coins shifts. We can literally read the shifting political structures right off the bronze and copper. Suddenly, you have coins asserting local identities, coins naming the tribe in the area, coins naming a tribe and a chief, or even coins proudly declaring the tribe as a republic. The coins are literally broadcasting, "We are independent now."
Into Section 5, Foreign and Regional Kings and Their Dynasties.
As time went on, new rulers arrived from the outside. What's super fascinating here is the sheer cultural fusion. When Indo-Greek rulers took over territories in India, conquest meant compromise. They issued these incredible bilingual, biscriptural coins. Greek on one side, Indian Prakrit on the other. For many of these Indo-Greek kings, these coins are literally the only proof we have today that they even existed.
Then you have the Western Kshatrapas, who alongside other powerful dynasties like the Kushanas, honestly gave historians a massive gift. The Saka Kshatrapas were the very first in ancient India to continuously date their coins. They used Brahmi numerals, reckoning time in the Saka era, stamped right behind the ruler's head. Before this, dating Indian history was incredibly murky, but these silver coins give us a precise year-by-year political timeline.
Meanwhile, down in the Deccan Plateau, the Satavahana dynasty handed us another incredible first. On coins found at Junnar, we actually see the name of Queen Naganika. She's the very first female co-ruler permanently stamped into history on an Indian coin. It completely shifts how we understand gender and political power in that era. This rich tradition of data-heavy coins would eventually pave the way for the spectacular gold coins of the Gupta dynasty and later on the incredibly diverse currencies of early medieval India.
Finally, Section 6, the Roman coin trade and global wealth in India.
170. That is the staggering number of recorded Roman coin hoards and stray finds from over 130 sites across India. We're not just talking about a few dropped coins here. We are talking about massive stashes of wealth, especially concentrated down in the southern states.
Looking at this table, it's like a snapshot of a massive global economic engine. Roman emperors literally poured their treasuries into India just to buy spices, gems, and textiles. It kicked off with silver denarii under Augustus. Then, during the absolute peak of trade, emperors like Nero were sending over heavy gold aureus coins. Eventually, as Rome's economy weakened centuries later, the trade dwindled down to copper and thin gold. The Indian economy was so strong, it was quite literally absorbing the wealth of the Roman Empire.
I really hope this explainer leaves you marveling at how a tiny piece of stamped metal is essentially a time machine. We've gone from melting pots to imperial decrees and global trade networks, all just by looking at the pocket change of ancient citizens. Which leaves me wondering, if a clipped piece of ancient silver can decode an entire lost economy for us today, what on earth will our modern digital transactions tell future historians about us? Thank you so much for watching, and keep learning.